What does this mean? Well, JP1 gives Betty's actual voice or perspective potentially more weight or influence and justification than JP2. And this will make her say in JP1 potentially more useful for her than her say is in JP2. In this sense, Betty's justificatory say in JP1 is high in discursive purchase, while her say in JP2 is low in discursive purchase. Now, I need to add 3 remarks on this that will become relevant in a minute. And here I'm only able to gesture at things. For more details, please consult the lecture readings. The first remark is relatively straightforward. The key factor that determines the discursive purchase of a justificatory say is how readily available it is for agents to meet relevant authoritativeness constraints. As a rule of thumb, the less available this is, the less discursive purchase a justificatory say will have. The second remark is a bit more complex. A justificatory say can vary in purchase not only across different justification practices, but also within one and the same practice. Closely related to this is a matter that concerns justification practices that apply non-trivial authoritativeness constraints to actual people, that is, constraints that not every relevant person always meets anyway. Real people typically differ in their deliberation resources, and these differences will often have at least some impact on how readily available non-trivial authoritativeness constraints are for them. Arguably, this implies that some differences in discursive purchase, or say some level of purchase inequality, is expectable, if not unavoidable, in any form of actual public justification that applies non-trivial authoritativeness constraints across inclusive and diverse constituencies. At least, what we have seen so far suggests a distinction between formal and substantive discursive equality. Roughly, a justification practice JP accords 2 people, alpha and beta, discursive standing that is equal formally, if and only if JP first accords alpha and beta discursive standing of the same kind, for instance, a justificatory say, and second, JP applies to them the same authoritativeness constraints, such as a reasonableness threshold. However, JP accords alpha and beta discursive standing that is equal substantively only if JP accords alpha and beta standing that is equal in discursive purchase. The intuitive point that drives this distinction is this. Formal discursive equality is a matter of the consistent application of justification requirements to relevant agents, while substantive discursive equality is a function of the discursive influence that an application of these requirements leaves people with. Let us briefly apply this distinction to Lamar's hypotheticalizing form of actualist public justification, or LJ. It is plain that LJ can model formal discursive equality. LJ accords both reasonable and unreasonable citizens a justificatory say and applies to all the same reasonableness threshold. But LJ does not model substantive discursive equality. To reasonable people, it allocates a high purchase justificatory say that is more like Betty's say in JP1. But to unreasonable people, it allocates a low purchase justificatory say that is a bit more like Betty's say in JP2. And with this, I return to the question asked earlier. This was the question of whether LJ can model equal discursive respect, or in different terms, whether it can accord people an equal justificatory say. Well, can it? The above suggests the following picture. LJ can model formal discursive equality. Hence, it can model formally equal discursive respect. But LJ does not model substantive discursive equality, and hence it does not model substantively equal discursive respect. And with this, our question shifts. The question now becomes whether equal discursive respect, or an equal justificatory say requires formal or substantive discursive equality, or both, or perhaps something in between. So here are three thoughts on this point. I assume here and in what follows that equal discursive respect requires at least formal discursive equality. That's not an obvious truth, but I assume this. At least intuitively, however, equal discursive respect should require, or we should think of it in terms that such that it requires more than formal discursive equality. Why? Well, the point can be brought home, I believe, by considering the following example. Consider another justification practice, JP3. JP3 accords all citizens a justificatory say, and it applies to everyone the same authoritativeness constraint C. Suppose also that JP3's constituency include dominant group and marginal group. Next, assume that dominant group has used its social influence to define C in terms of values that its members typically accept. In JP3, therefore, discursive input counts as authoritative only insofar as it coheres with dominant group values. But now assume that the members of marginal group typically reject these values. Thus, members of dominant group typically have a standing more like Betty in JP1, but members of marginal group typically have a standing more like Betty in JP2. Now it's plain that JP3 satisfies formal discursive equality, but it seems that JP3 effectively entrenches the dominance of dominant group at the level of JP3's standards of justification. And with this, it seems JP3 turns justification itself into some kind of vehicle of domination or marginalization. And whatever equal discursive respect requires, it seems incompatible with discursive domination or marginalization. Well, if equal discursive respect requires more than formal discursive equality, does it require formal and substantive equality, or say discursive equity? Well, we saw earlier that if actualist public justification applies non-trivial authoritativeness constraints across inclusive and diverse constituencies, then it will involve some level of purchase inequality. Yeah, this can quite innocently be so and quite unobjectionably. But if that is so, then we can argue that if there is an interesting form of actualist public justification that models equal discursive respect cannot require discursive equity. Well, here's the third option. Third option is to argue that equal discursive respect requires more than formal discursive equality, but less than discursive equity. On this view, equal discursive respect allows for differences in discursive purchase, but not every form of discursive inequality is compatible with it. If we put the point in terms of LJ, the idea would be that LJ can extend alpha and beta equal discursive respect, even if LJ accords alpha and beta a justificatory say that is unequal substantively, so long as the justificatory say does not impermissibly differ in discursive purchase. Well, arguably, as far as this goes, this seems plausible, or at least more plausible than the other options. But it implies that we cannot know whether LJ can model equal discursive respect unless we know when differences in discursive purchase are permissible. And with this, the question shifts again. The question now becomes, what constitutes permissible purchase inequality? Let me bring this back to the exclusion objection. We wanted to know whether hypotheticalizing actualist public justification can accommodate the exclusion objection. To this end, I ask whether LJ can model equal discursive respect. The above suggests a nuanced answer. LJ meets formal discursive equality, but this is insufficient to accommodate the exclusion objection if equal discursive respect requires the absence of impermissible purchase inequality. Hence, LJ cannot accommodate the exclusion objection so long as its allocation of purchase inequality is impermissible. This leaves proponents and critics of political liberalism with two questions. First, who should be accorded a justificatory say or discursive respect within political liberalism's actualist public justification? And second, what level of substantive discursive inequality is permissible in actualist and fundamental public justification? Hypotheticalizing actualist public justification can address the first question in a manner that goes at least some way toward meeting the exclusion objection. Some way. But this puts the second question center stage. And this is the question with which I shall leave you today. It is not clear how this question can be answered. What is clear, however, is that political liberalism stands or falls with a plausible and compelling answer to this question.